Hello, everybody, and welcome to another adventure in history. I know that I'm late, but things had to happen, and tea was being prepared, and it's been an odd day. Um, I know. 4 minutes. I will take my castigation in stride. I knew that I was late. I felt it in the back of my head that things were not progressing at a fast enough speed. But hello, everybody. Tropical, good to see you. Tuna, Cave Geek, Moose, how are you all? Hope that the world is treating you fairly and nicely. It's been a real interesting day. So I'm still on spring break, and I thought that today I was going to wake up and do a lot of Gundam stuff and be happy and get a whole bunch of things accomplished. And honestly, I felt pretty crappy. This heat cold thing has hit me again, and my sinuses have clogged up, and it's made it tough to breathe, and it's also made my stomach really upset. So it's just been an odd duck kind of day. But we're going to do Adventures in History, and that's going to perk me up. And hopefully this tea will loosen some of this. You blame tree sex. Tuna, it's not just the tree sex. It's the tree sex and the flowering shrub sex and the grass sex as well. Just the broad horticultural orgy that is happening in spring right now. I think that's probably to blame. But I hope that this isn't all also wrecking your worlds. Allergies do kind of suck. But here we go. Yeah. So, they say the best laid plans of mice and men, so stop making those plans with those friggin' mice. Exactly. What is the first recorded instance of allergies? That's a great question. I don't know. I would suspect that they probably show up in Galen. Just that Galen is a Greek. He's a historical Greek medicine person. What I'm losing all of my words. Doctor, Lord have mercy. Maybe Hippocrates as well. I think Galen was actually probably more likely to write about that than Hippocrates would, though. Probably one of those two, but maybe even as far back as the Egyptians, perhaps the Sumerians. I don't know. According to the Google, occasional descriptions of allergic diseases occurred in antiquity, such as suggested that one pharaoh died after anaphylaxis after a bee sting. There we go. First convincing description of hay fever was by John Bostock, who described his own symptoms in 1828. Allergies were first recorded by the Incans in Machu Picchu. That's a fair one. I appreciate that one quite a bit. Of course, that was then lost for hundreds of years before we rediscovered it. But that's a whole other world. Of course, the Spanish conqueror that took over the Incas was, Vasco da Gama. So, tried to make something there. It didn't really work very well. We're going to talk about some Korean people tonight, specifically this guy right here, Yusun Sin. This is a viewer request. Came in from our buddy Moose.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus. Vern.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
Vern is Spartacus. Vern, good to see you, my friend. I was just thinking yesterday about wanting to go to the city, and I was like, man, it'd be really cool to try to see if I could catch Vern on a day off, and we could walk around and eat foreign food and goof off and go to the Met. That would be a good day. That would be a really good day. Hopefully it won't be too long, my friend. Hopefully not. It would be good to see you. But thank you for the sub. I appreciate it. What's up, Viscera? Day's going oddly, but probably on the top half. I'd give it higher than a 50%. You can let me know in advance. Why is New York referred to as the city? Who decided that? All of the other cities get together and vote New York to be prom queen of cities. Well, it's sort of a turn of phrase where it's like, oh, I'm going to go to New York. And people are like, you mean the state or the city? And then people go the city. So it just sort of stuck as New York, the city. I guess that isn't fair to all of the other cities, but that is how it became. There we go. Blame Sarah Jessica Parker. I don't think did she write any of that show? Maybe if she wrote some of the show, but I don't know if she was part of it. Not the only one. Tales of the City are about San Francisco. There we go. So there's another The City that's called The City. All right. Yeah, Koreans. So before we sort of launch into Yi Sun Sin, I feel like it would probably be helpful to give a bit of historical background. Now, there's a reason for that, and part of this reason is Western history classes don't teach about Eastern history at all, in many cases, or very scant references, if any. And those get very frequently looked over, so I don't know if most people have a knowledge of what's going on sort of in this time period in the first place. So if I just started talking about this stuff, I don't know if anybody would really be able to kind of latch onto this material. So this isn't an insult to anybody. It's just I bet that a lot of people probably didn't hear about this in their history classes. So yeah, the East is always just the place where spice is from, and then World War II. I don't even know what time period we're talking about exactly. See, that's the kicker. So we're going to be talking about the 1500s tonight. Also, hey, Green Herring, good to see you. So we're going to talk a little bit about three countries, and we're going to start a little bit of background here in Japan. Spice comes from Arrakis. That's true. And it must flow. It must flow. We've got to have it. For most of the 1500s, Japan was wrapping up a period of history in their world that we refer to as the Muromachi period. The Muromachi period is full of lots of violence. There are pretty much ongoing civil wars for over 200 years. There were lots of very violent attacks. The central government failed multiple times. There's always going to be an emperor involved, but we're talking about the change of sort of the central political structures. The capital is going to get burned multiple times. There's a really high level of death. There's a lot of people that get killed in this, and the guy that's going to sort of move the country of Japan out of this period is a dude named Oda Nobunaga, who some of you may have heard of. He's a fairly famous Japanese guy. There's a photo of him right here. Betrayal and horses. Yeah, lots of betrayal. You got a history of Spain, Puerto Rico, and one semester of USA. Exactly, right. When in Time is Carmen Sandiego. So Nobunaga is going to be... What anime is he from? He's actually in quite a few anime and several video games. If you ever played the original Onimusha video games, he was the bad guy in Onimusha 1. He's in lots of different anime, including one of my recent favorites is this short series. Well, I say short. The series itself is like 50 or so episodes, but they're all about 2 or 3 minutes long. It's called Nobunaga's Ninja. I think, or is it Nobunaga's Shinobi? Maybe that's what it is. Nobunaga Shinobi. Anyway, it's super cute and it's pretty funny. Anyway, this is Oda Nobunaga. He's going to be the guy that starts unifying Japan. And we could do an entire stream on this guy. He's going to end up killing a lot of powerful people. He's going to basically take over the position of shogun. He's going to end the previous ruling family's shogunate. And he's going to basically be the guy that moves Japan towards a more unified structure that's going to last until he ends up killing himself, and then this guy's going to take over. This is Toyotomi Hideyoshi. He's not that big. It's just the clothes. Toyotomi Hideyoshi is going to be really important for the majority of the stream tonight. So this guy, when he takes over after Nobunaga, he's going... Well, first off, did he assassinate all the tailors? Probably not. He was actually one of Nobunaga's closest supporters, and when Nobunaga kills himself, Toyotomi Hideyoshi is going to take over, and he's going to be the guy that actually does most of the unification after Nobunaga. So by the time Hideyoshi takes over, things are pretty well solidified in Japan, and that's going to be really important because Hideyoshi's got a lot of ideas. He's got a lot of ideas, especially about conquering other areas and what's going on in the other areas, especially what's going on in Korea and China. So what we need to get out of this preface about Japan is they have gone through a lot, but things are looking better. These two unifiers have brought most of Japan together. And they have a big army. Well, Toyotomi Hideyoshi has a big big army that is very skilled because of all of this fighting that they've been having to do. And they're really, really, really good fighters. That's going to be really important, right? He does look very Shinto. At that time in Japan, Shinto was definitely a big deal. The leadership itself was going through a sort of a weird flux period where there was the beginnings of a Neo-Confucian school of thought. Buddhism was still around, but it wasn't necessarily the dominant religious force in the leadership part. They were going to sort of be this. I should say that if they were going to be Buddhist, they were going to be the Pure Land Buddhist, the Amida Buddhism that was sort of the Japanese flavor of Buddhism, which had effectively blended the Buddhist teachings of Mahayana that had come over from China with Japanese Shinto to the point where it was almost indistinguishable between the two. But especially at the court, they're still going to rely quite a bit on water or air Buddhists. Yeah, exactly. He's by no means the Fire Clan. But anyway, there's a bit of a rebirth of Confucianism, especially in intellectual levels during this time period. And that's probably going to be in response to the cultural move back towards a central unifying leadership as opposed to all of these different warlords killing each other all the time, right? Confucianism lends itself towards a very structured hierarchy. So there had always been Confucius supporting the emperor. The emperors at this time in Japan, though, were very, very weak. and didn't have a lot of say-so. So they're not particularly important to the larger political sphere of things. Now, what's going on over in Korea? Well, Korea during this time period is in a period that they call the Joseon period. And they are being ruled by an emperor who, well, I guess I should go ahead and put him up here too, named Sonjo. And this is he. So this is Emperor Sonjo. Now, the Joseon period is an interesting one politically speaking, because you had a unified central government, but there's a lot of sort of internal weirdness going on inside of the political structure. He looks like he's going to give you a quest. It's probably a really annoying fetch quest where you have to go all the way across the map and pick up this one thing and bring it back to him, and then he gives you like $5 in in-game currency, which is not really worth the time. But you have to do it, because if you don't progress that, you don't get to the good quest, right? And it's just annoying. It's obviously filler where they're trying to create more game time on a game that was rushed at crunch. So you just put a whole bunch of these really crappy missions in, and everybody knows exactly where those are. Like, oh, I'm just going on a fetch quest again. Looking at you, Skyrim. Okay, so anyway, plus 10 experience points. Exactly right. So Korea and Japan had, for a long time, been either allies or enemies with each other. As Japan had sort of descended into this Muromachi period where everything was falling apart, Korea had not necessarily been big fans of Japan. They had sort of shifted a little bit of their attention back towards China. China at the time was going through some internal issues as well. We're going to come out the other side with the Ming Dynasty in China. Ming Dynasty. Ming Dynasty in China is going to be the ruling family down here. So Korea and China had become fairly good friends, which is not always the case. Part of this is because they have a similar enemy. There are a group of people that are up in this region that are threats to both Korea and northern China that are referred to as the Jurchen, who were mostly causing lots of trouble along both of their borders. And so China and Japan had not really had a lot of contact either. So Korea and Japan had not really had a lot of contact. So China and Korea sort of make not necessarily a super friendly alliance, but definitely one that is steady, right? They both kind of understand that they're in positions of not necessarily super big strength. So the Ming Dynasty in China is fairly new at this time, and Sonjo, the emperor in Korea, has some of his own issues, and most of this stuff is internal. So inside of Korea, there were lots of noble families that were causing a whole bunch of consternation. They're all fighting with each other. They're being really, really, really messy. They're betraying each other, stabbing each other in the back. They are being just giant messes to each other. And even during Sonjo's period of rule, he rules from 1552 to 1608. And while he's on the throne, he thinks that he's basically got some peace in Korea, but this doesn't actually look like peace if you really, really look at it. There are some big noble families, and they're causing trouble, and effectively the eastern and the western parts of Korea are going to sort of split between rulers. So nobles on this side of the peninsula and nobles on this side of the peninsula are going to kind of be at each other's throats. And that's an important thing to remember, because in just a bit, that's going to come back as a problem. Now, one of the threats to all of this region were a group of people that in Korean were called Wagyu. This is not the Japanese fatty beef, that's Wagyu, and it's spelled differently. This is Wagyu. In Japanese, it's Woku. Anyway, these were pirates, and specifically they were pirates that were big in activity here along the western coast of Japan, around the peninsula. They're not super tasty fatty pirates. And the northern part of China here. There had even been reports as far down here as the northern island, down around Luzon and what is modern day Philippines. But these pirates were problematic, and a lot of them were Chinese, but a fair portion of them were Japanese. And part of the problem with these pirates is that they were using a lot of these islands around the coast of Japan as bases. Because again, for a long period of time, Japan hadn't really had control over itself. It was the Muromachi period. There was a lot of crazy stuff going on. So the pirates had nice places to hang out. But what this is going to do is it's going to create the need on both the part of the Koreans and the Chinese to have a fairly sizable standing navy. And that's an important point as well, because we're going to come back to that in just a bit. So this is sort of the groundwork that all of this stuff is going to take place in and around, because all of these things that I've mentioned are going to end up coming back to play later on. Now, I know that was a fairly long preface, but it makes sense when this story is going to sort of play out here. So, who is our guy, Yi Sun-sin? Who is this guy, and why are we going to spend the next hour and a half or so talking about this guy? So this is one of the few remaining pictures of Yi Sun-sin. I know it's not particularly the world's best quality photograph, but I mean, it's from 500 years ago, so it's not going to be the best looking picture anyway. So this is Yi Sun-sin. It looks like it was restored. It may have been touched up here or there, but here he is. Nice hat. I would say this is probably about a 6.5, 7 hat. The crest is definitely adding something to it here. If the crest was vertical instead of swoopy, it might be pushing 7.5. Like if this was just like a big mohawk crest, I would probably give it a little bit of a higher rating. They were on a 4G network back then, right? So that's Yi Sun-sin. Who is this guy? Well, his family had a noble heritage. His grandfather had worked in the government, but the government had not really treated him very well. This is part of these internal noble disputes that had been going on inside of the Joseon court for a while. Hey, you've got to stop chewing on your leg. The puppy is behind me, and she's doing that thing where she's chewing on her leg again. She's causing a hot spot. Yes, I see you. Yes. Oh, now she's going to skulk off because I told her she couldn't chew on her leg. Better her leg than yours. Well, if she was chewing on my leg, I wouldn't get a hot spot. But anyway. So his grandfather was in the government, but had a lot of trouble with the nobility, and his dad, so Yi Sun-sin's dad, had decided not to pursue government role, which is sort of odd because you were kind of expected to be in the government. This was not necessarily a hereditary guarantee. You did have to pass some pretty involved tests, like competency tests, to get into the government positions. But it was a fairly cushy position, right? Like if your dad was in the government and you were competent, you could probably end up with that same position. What's up, Uncle Bill? How's it going? So the fact that Yu Sun Sen's dad didn't go into the government was kind of like a ooh, wow, that's, I don't know about that, man. That's kind of a passing up a really cushy job, but that's kind of, the atmosphere that was going on. There's a lot of political infighting. So when Yu Sun Sen was born, he didn't really know exactly what his future was going to hold. But he was a pretty smart kid, apparently. He apparently was really good at games. So he had, a pretty bright mind, even as a kid. We don't get too terribly much about what was going on in his young life. We get that he was a pretty good archer, which was, a nice thing to have, right? But we don't get a whole bunch of, day-to-day anecdotes about this kid's life. We do know that at some point at his early teenage years, he did decide that he was going to pick back up the family sort of role of being in the government, and did okay on those exams, and then decided that he didn't really like the idea of the government very much, so he was going to go into the military. And the military exams were different. So you had to pass these different exams to be into the military. You had to show that you could, be competent for command, and you had to do all these different physical exercises. And in the first time that he took the exam, he fell off of his horse and broke his leg. So he didn't pass his officer's exams or his military exams the first time. It took him until 1576 to try again. So I didn't even tell you when he was born. He was born in 1545. So he gets into the military in 1576. He's 31 at this point. And he gets stuck in a position way up in the north, way up here in the northern part of Korea. So at that point, Korea was fairly unified, and he gets put up here in the north because of these constant raids of the Jurchen. There was a lot of need for competent military commanders. So this kid, he's not a kid at this point, he's 31, that had shown that he was smart and capable, gets sent up to the north. Was there a magical ice wall in the north? No. There wasn't even a magical anything kind of wall up in the north. There wasn't even a mundane wall in the north. There was just, a bunch of border forts and military positions. But he's going to do pretty well. He's going to make a name for himself very, very rapidly. He is very quickly going to show that he's incredibly intelligent. They don't give him necessarily a very big force of soldiers because he's sort of new and untested, and even though he's smart, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do well. But even with the small band of soldiers that he has, he's going to end up being really successful. He shows a sort of a keen mind for strategy. He catches some of these Jurchen off guard and catches them in some ambushes and does a lot of stuff that sort of belies the fact that he doesn't have this whole army behind him. And this is really going to make a lot of people sort of recognize that the dude is good. So he gets promoted fairly quickly. And by the time he's 32, so, just a year or a little bit more than a year later, he's already in one of the top command positions in the entire military. And a lot of people don't like this. Specifically, the existing leadership don't care for this very much at all. And he ends up getting framed by some older rival commanders. And they're going to basically accuse him of all of these malappropriations of goods and funding and resources, and they're going to basically say that he is this frame job is going to make him out to be an incompetent commander. But he had made a really good name for himself, so they don't outright kill him. What they do instead is that they basically arrest him and they drag him back down to the south for interrogation. And they beat him and they torture the crap out of him to basically get him to confess to these supposed sins. And when he's like, I didn't do any of this stuff, this is all being, made up, they decide to not kill him, but basically stick him back in the military as the lowest ranked foot soldier. So, they don't want to necessarily waste a competent person that can swing a sword or, wield a spear. So they put him back at the lowest level of foot soldier. Now, that's going to be very humiliating for this guy because, again, he had kind of overcome a family stigma, right? By getting back into the military. He was sort of going to, rebuild the family name and restore the family honor. And he was doing everything that he needed to do up in the north, and he had done really, really well on a lot of these campaigns against Jurchen. And then this humiliation and this loss of rank and the torture. Let's not forget the torture, right? But he sticks it out, and he sort of goes right back to work, and he's going to end up getting promoted, not necessarily by the upper leadership, but by his field command, right? They realize really fast, like, this guy's not a foot soldier. He's not just a regular run-of-the-mill, everyday kind of guy. So he's going to end up getting all the way back up to officer status again. And then in 1591, he's going to end up getting a naval command. Now, it's a small post, and it's up here on this northern coastline, right around in here. And he's basically going to be tasked with keeping these ports clear of this pirate activity. And there was a little bit of reasoning behind this too. He does have math skills. He's very competent, very good leader. Now, one of the things that's happening kind of in the background is that over here in Japan, Toyotomi Hideyoshi has, by this point in like 1590, 1591, he has brought basically not complete peace to Japan, but most of Japan is pacified at this point, and he's got a lot of soldiers and navy at his command. And he really saw an opportunity to take out some aggression against China. Now, China had always been sort of the big influence on Japan, right? A lot of old Japanese culture going way back into like the 300s and the 200s and stuff like that had come over from China. The original Japanese writing style was just Chinese. A lot of the big reforms in the 400s and 500s and 600s were based on Chinese government styles and things like that. So Japan had always sort of had this tenuous relationship with China, but China was fairly weak at this point, right? We just got a new dynasty. There's a lot of fighting going on over in China, especially over here in the west and then along the northern border. The Ming are not in a particularly powerful position. And Toyotomi Hideyoshi sees this as an opportunity to basically become the most powerful Asian country. And so he wants to invade China. Now, he had been speaking with Sejong, the Emperor of Korea. And he had basically said, look, we want you to guarantee us safe passage into Chinese waters. Right? So we're going to sail past your border, and we want you to lay off. We want you to stay away from our boats. We want you to promise that you're not going to hamper our navy. We want you to Swear that you're not going to harass our supply ships that are coming through. And Sejong was allied with China and was like, no, I don't think we're going to do that. And Toyotomi got kind of peeved. And so then he was like, okay, if you don't want us sailing, that's fine. Give us access to a port city in Korea, and we'll just float over and we'll unload all of our troops, and then we'll march into China. What do you mean you won't turn on your allies? Pretty much, right? So if you won't let us float over to China, let us unload our soldiers and we'll just march into China. And so John was like, no, we don't want you to do that either. They don't know that betrayal is inevitable, right? Well, we'll see what happens. But basically, Toyotomi Hideyoshi gets really, really mad at the Koreans. It does sound fishy, right? Now, Sejong was worried that if he did nothing, that China was going to turn on Korea. So that was a problematic issue. He was really worried about this idea of the Japanese landing in Korea and then marching into China. That was really, really against anything that he wanted to do, because he was worried that the Chinese would figure out where the Japanese were coming from, and then the Chinese would send their army into Korea, and then he would have to deal with 2 foreign armies inside of his territory duking it out in his own cities. So he was like, no, I don't like that at all. So Hideyoshi decides, all right, guys, strap up. We're just going to go invade Korea, and we'll just take Korea. And when we get all of the Korean peninsula, we'll just end up owning that, and then we'll use that as a springboard to invade and conquer China. So, change of plans. We're not going to invade China. We're going to invade Korea. Now, this had been something of a rumor for a while. For a year or two, the negotiations between Hideyoshi and Sejong had gone progressively more and more negative. It's just, I'm saying his name wrong. It's not Sejong, it's Sunjo. Sorry, I'm saying his name wrong. I apologize. Historically speaking, I said his name wrong. What's up, Lumpy? How's it going? We need to do some shout-outs. We've got Cave Geek Art in the room. Cave Geek, artist extraordinaire, does cool stuff. Currently building life-size Argonath for a party. You should go give Cave Geek a follow. We've got Lumpy Dragon Potato in the room for all of your fantasy Minecraft building needs and all of those pressing organic chemistry questions that you can't sleep because you don't have answered. Go give my buddy Lumpy a follow. Life size, not story size. Yeah, there we go. We've also got JMR Killer in the room, who has one of the bigger Gundam backlogs that I've ever seen. JMR is building a lot on streams, building some Gundam stuff and some Lego stuff, and also playing games occasionally. So go give JMR a follow. JMR a follow. Y'all down there and give JMR a follow. Whoo! Also a master of late night gaming. Indeed. So come on down. All right. Did I miss anybody else? Who else is on the list? I think I got everybody. We got Vipers in the room. Vipers is going to get back around to streaming eventually, so go ahead and give him a follow now for all of your gaming and eventually deep arguing, philosophically, culturally sensitive, but also intelligently discussed needs. So there we go. Go give him a follow. All right. So poop stirring. Yeah, the pot shall be stirred. Now, in 592, Toyotomi is going to invade Korea. And he's going to start right down here at the city of Busan. And this is going to be really bad for the Koreans. Sunjo had somewhat naively believed that he had brought peace to the Korean Peninsula and had actually started downsizing the Korean military. This was in direct opposition to what most of the nobility was telling him. They were telling him, Japan is potentially going to invade. You don't need to downsize the military. But he was like, we're at peace and everybody is happy. And Japan's going to stay over there. They don't have anything to do with us. They want to invade China. And the nobles in Korea were like, no, they're going to get here first. And he's like, nah. And then they did. And he's like, crap. So Busan falls really fast. And the Japanese are going to use this as an invasion point. They take over the entire bay where the city of Busan is, and they're going to unload thousands and thousands and thousands of troops. And it doesn't take them very long to start conquering the big cities. They're going to take Seoul. Pretty quickly after that, they're going to turn and start moving into the interior. And the Japanese are doing so well that the Koreans start burning their own crops and their own fields so that the Japanese can't take them because they're just that on the back foot, right? The Koreans are getting completely overwhelmed here. And again, this is because the Japanese armies were incredibly efficient. They're really highly skilled. They had a lot of battle experience. A lot of the people that were leading soldiers in this invasion that were, generals on the field had decades of fighting experience going all the way back to under Oda Nobunaga. So these are battle-hardened Japanese samurai against a depleted and not ready Korean military force. Things do not go well on the ground for the Koreans. They lose a lot of ground really, really rapidly. They're going to end up losing Pyongyang, and the Sunjo is basically running around sort of out of his own capital, kind of in exile, trying to organize all of the stuff up here in the north. But he can't go too far north because the Jurchen are still up here. And there's even a one point where Sunjo decides that it might be worth asking the Jurchen to come help against the Japanese, but the nobility were like, we're already weak, we're already losing, and you want to bring the bad guys in to help? All they're going to do is stay if you bring them in. So Sunjo's like, okay, what do we do? And they're like, China, maybe? Have you considered asking, China for aid? And he's like, that's right, we're allied with China. We should ask China. So they send word over to the Ming Dynasty, and the Ming Dynasty goes, yeah, we would love to send you an army. The problem is we're fighting a rebellion of our own, and it's not really going so great, so we can't really afford to send you an army right now, but if you could hold on maybe 6 months to a year, we might be able to put an army together and get it up to you. And Sunjo's like, I guess if that's the best you can do, we'll take it, but it'd be really great if you could, you could get an army here a little bit faster than that. Joseon calls for aid. Where were you when the Southfold fell, right? It doesn't go very well. Now, what's up, Tad? How's it going? Rock Korea hard place. Indeed. You should go follow Tad. Tad was streaming last night, and I really wanted to get around to it, but I ended up not doing that because I was a lazy bum. Tad is also a Gunpla streamer and just came back from Japan, and I was talking about that last night on stream, and I just allowed myself to get too busy to go hang out. But I hope your trip turned out great, and I hope that you brought back all of the cool Gunpla. Post the VOD, but thanks for everybody. Okay, cool. Maybe I can check that out. Anyway, so while all of this is happening, what is our boy Yi Sun Sin doing? And the answer is he's sort of waiting to be told what to do. Now, most of this stuff that's been happening is on land. The early part of the war in 1592 was just all land stuff. And the naval leaders down here in the south, they pretty much stank. They didn't really have what they needed to do to get by. They didn't really have the skills that they needed to handle these giant ships of the Japanese. So what are they to do? Well, Yi Sun Sin sort of decides to interestingly interpret some requests. So some of the southern admirals down here had kind of said, hey, do you have any supplies that you could send, or do you have any way that you could help reinforce us down here in the south? And Yi Sun Sin's going to take that as kind of a, hey, you should come down here and help us fight. Now, it's not necessarily exactly what they said. He kind of strategically interprets these commands or these requests from the leadership, because again, his sort of home base is up here in the north. He's not necessarily supposed to be down here, but not really else. Nobody else down there is doing any good. So he's like, I'm going to just kind of go south. Now, he's got a fairly sizable fleet with him, but it's not an enormous fleet. The Japanese had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ships, and he's only got a few, right? He's got like, maybe 50 or so total, but not all of those are big. Some of them are sort of smaller, kind of tactical ships and things like that. And the Japanese have some truly, truly gigantic ships, including these called Takebune. Which looks like these. So this is a picture of an Takebune. It's basically a floating fort. These are humongous ships that could house dozens and dozens and dozens of troops, and they were gigantic, just absolutely huge. So this is basically a house on the top deck here, so you can sort of use that as proportion for the rest of the ship. They even have their own air conditioning on the side. These are, this particular one is from a little bit later. This is the mon of hollyhock leaves that becomes indicative of the Tokugawa clan. But I needed a picture of an Takebune, and I had to find one that worked, right? Those are not big fans. Those are the triple hollyhock of Tokugawa. But it's a fun idea. Anyway, so this is a little bit later, maybe 30 years later. But anyway, the size is what we're looking at here. So here are some bows up here on the top deck. Because anyway, it's a big old honking ship, and the Japanese had lots of them. Looks kind of unwieldy. They are kind of unwieldy, and that's one of the things that that is going to sort of be the downfall. Now, this is going to bring us to a battle. This is going to be the Battle of Hassan Island. Such seaworthiness, much warship. Yeah, exactly. So the Battle of Hassan Island is in July of 1592. And this is going to sort of be... Now, to be fair, Yi had fought several different battles, that much smaller ones along the way, where he was either outnumbering the opponent, or he just sort of caught them unawares because he was floating from the north and nobody up there was causing them much trouble. Yes, these are propelled. The Takebune were, yeah. Lots of them, though. So he had fought several other battles along the way and won all of them, but this is going to be the first really, really big one here. He had sort of caught the Japanese by surprise because, again, nobody was really expecting this force to come out of the north. And he's going to catch them around the island here and use the island and some of the natural waterways very, very strategically to position himself in a way to spring sort of a trap on them. And these big Atakabune, as Tad sort of pointed out, they're not particularly easy to maneuver. And it turns out that a lot of the Japanese ships were only lightly armed, whereas the Korean ships had a lot of different armaments. Specifically, they had cannon. They also had rocket-propelled spears that were in these sort of clusters of racks. I should have probably grabbed a picture of those. Let me quickly. Let me go find a picture of a huaka. These guys. So these are what are called hwacha. And you have these big spears, and you can see here on the tip that they have basically bottle rockets on them. And you light this sort of big box full of stuff, and it launches these out in this big cloud. And they were pretty devastating, especially if you are in one of these big Japanese ships and you're waiting on the deck as a Marine, hoping that your ship can float up next to the Korean ship, and then you can board their ship and attack them one-on-one. But if you're having to attack through these hail of these giant arrows, you're going to be in trouble. It's pretty nasty stuff. That may be it. Anyway, I'm actually going to need to take a break real quick. I know this is very odd for me, but I need to put up the break screen, and I'll be back in just a bit. So hang on. We'll get around to the end of the battle in just a second. Be right back. everybody. Sorry about that. The middle picture is me sitting on an ancient Roman toilet from the city of Philippi. And no, that wasn't live. That came from 2019 when I was in Greece with Mac in a lab coat. Was it cleaned out at least? It was not in use. There wasn't water running through the trough anymore. But it was pretty cool. I didn't actually use it. I was just sitting on it. Right? Anyway. So, Hassan Island. Anyway. Hassan Island is one of Yi's first really big victories. And he is going to end up sinking nearly 100 Japanese ships at this battle. And he doesn't lose any of his own ships, and only 19 of his whole naval force ends up dying, which is kind of miraculous compared to, you know, the size of the force that he was fighting versus how many soldiers that he had. I guess technically sailors there would be the correct term. This is a big deal because this is kind of a stunning upset. Here's this nobody who doesn't really have a big, you know, flotilla of ships that's going to manage to attack the Japanese, destroy 100, more than 100 of their ships. No, actually, it's not quite 100, but anyway, it's a lot. Each ship was a big loss, or were they mass-produced? The Japanese had standardized shipbuilding procedures, so they weren't necessarily what we would call mass-produced. Each one did cost a substantial amount of money and time and effort. But they had shipyards where a lot of these were made. But it wasn't like they cranked out 15 or 20 of these a year, right? This is a significant portion of the Japanese Navy. Did Lumpy kind of ruin the stream for me before it even started? Oh, with yeah. Well, he goes, yeah. It's not necessarily ye. He doesn't go ye. It's more like a yeah. I don't know. Maybe. Anyway, funny stuff. Anyway, Hassan Island, big victory. Now, if we look at the kind of ships that our friend Yi Sun Sin was using, he's going to be using these. These are called Panoxon ships, and they are not nearly as big. They are going to be propelled by oars. They do have a rather deep draft, so the water level is right here, and you're supposed to understand that all of this is under the water level. But these again are called Panoxon. They're much smaller than the Japanese ships, but they were also, again, much more heavily armed. And it's going to be around this particular time that Yi Sun Sin is going to begin to sort of tinker around. You like the turret, yeah, so that you can see out and navigate. What's really interesting is that these same sorts of ships that are being built over here in Korea are going to end up being sort of influential in design for a lot of other groups. So if you go back in time to like the Mongolian fleet, they're going to look a lot like these Korean ships with this sort of two big front pokey things that come out of it. So interesting stuff, though. Yes, the turtle ship is coming. Now, what is the turtle ship? Well, here's the thing. The Japanese, especially the big Japanese ships, like the Atakabune, had metal plating on the hulls. And not all of the Japanese ships had this, but enough of them did that Yi Sun Sin sort of figured out that this was a smart and interesting thing to do. And he's going to start sort of tinkering with his own design on some of these ships. And he's going to end up basically being, if not the inventor, sort of the biggest contributor to the development of what goes on to be called a turtle ship. So yeah, Frank Big Time. This would also welcome. This would have the Japanese plating would have been along the sides. If we go back to the Atakabune, this would have been sort of along the sides here. The stuff that would have gone out above the water. These might have been metal plated. Below the water wasn't necessarily that big of a deal because ramming wasn't really in the Japanese strategy. They were much more likely to sort of float their ship up beside yours and then use their deck to board your ship and then fight one-on-one on the deck. They definitely preferred that sort of marine invasion as opposed to open ship versus ship combat. But this is a design of a very early turtle ship. So this here and maybe this roof as well may have been made out of metal plates. Now, these were smaller. They did not have an overwhelmingly large amount of troops within them, but they were particularly heavily armed. They had lots of cannon, and they were much more maneuverable. Is this why Nintendo has such a vendetta against turtles in Mario games? Not necessarily. A lot of that has to also do with Japanese yokai. There is a yokai called Kappa, who are turtle-shelled yokai that live in water that pull kids in or play tricks on people. It's like a kaiju ship. Yeah, kind of, sort of. So the turtles in Mario are much more like a kappa than they are an actual turtle, because they move around and they, like, if you look at a picture of a kappa and then you look at a picture of the Koopas, right? Because they're called Koopa, right? It's even a play on the word there. They tried the tortoise ship first, but it sunk. There you go. Anyway, so Yu Senso's going to be responsible for either finalizing the plans, their designs of these, or at least making them up himself. There's a little bit of debate, but he's instrumental in bringing them into use in the Korean naval situation. And this is going to lead to the big ol' throwdown in September of 1592 at Busan Harbor. Now, Busan Harbor again is where the Japanese had made their first landing, and they were using the harbor there as a base of operations. And there are going to be hundreds and hundreds of ships in the harbor. So this is sort of a really dumb place to attack if you're not really good at it. And what's going to, and again, this is way down here in the south. So Busan is all the way down here, right? Now, this is really far away from technically where Yu Sen was supposed to be, up here. But, I mean, he's winning, so also the ground game is going pretty badly for the Koreans, so they're going to kind of take whatever they can. Anyway, he gets down here to Busan, and the Bay battle it's sort of a miraculous win. He's going to show up completely by surprise, and he's going to sink around 200 Japanese ships with basically no losses of his own. And this is going to absolutely freak the Japanese out. they're like, holy crap, this guy is sort of a ghost on the water. He's scary as crap. And when the Japanese are worried about their sea route and their ability to move supplies from Japan into their army in Korea, they really have to start thinking about how much further can we push? Can we push on into China? Are we going to be able to continue to supply the troops that we already have in the field? Because this guy is everywhere and he's beating us every time he shows up. And there's going to be a bit of a turn of luck here for the Koreans, because right after this happens, the Chinese army is going to finally show up from the Ming Dynasty over here into Korea, and they're going to reinforce the Korean troops. And as the Japanese were doubting their supply lines, when they start facing these numerically superior armies from the Chinese and combined Korean forces, they're going to start basically bailing out. And it's important for us to recognize here that, yes, the Chinese army did show up, but what Yi Sun-sin did was instrumental to the larger Korean victory here. Because if they had been able, they being the Japanese, had been able to continue this supply line, Toyotomi Hideyoshi could have just sent more troops. He had thousands. He had thousands more that he could have sent. And the Ming Dynasty troops were not particularly in the best of shape because they had just gone through a whole bunch of fighting themselves. They didn't really have any time to rest before they were told, now you've got to march all the way up to Korea to help the Koreans. So they weren't necessarily in the best of shape. They were good fighting soldiers, but they weren't really like primed and ready to go. So had the supply line to Japan been kept open and not threatened by Yi Sun-sin, the Japanese response to this situation would have been significantly different. So I'm not trying to say that this guy won this war single-handedly, but had the Koreans not been victorious on the sea, their victories later on the land after the Chinese army showed up would not have been as significant. So this guy really was instrumental in the overall victory. He wasn't necessarily single-handedly responsible for it, but he was a big part of it. And the Japanese are going to get pushed almost all the way out of Korea. They're only going to get to keep a couple of big castles that are right along the coast down here, which is going to sort of be a thorn in the side of the Koreans because you don't want the bad guys with a toehold in your country. But with a bigger navy sort of patrolling and floating around, it's a lot easier to keep big, masses of soldiers out. Now, 1593 sees an end to the first invasion, and then we move into sort of an interwar period. After Sunjo gets back to the capital and hears what all happened with Yi Sun-sin, he immediately gives this guy a promotion to head of the entire navy, because at this point he had fought 15 battles on the sea and had lost none of them. Right? He's undefeated. And this is a pretty spectacular feat. In many of these battles, he was way outnumbered, right? So he gets promoted to head of all the military. And the next year, in 1594, the Chinese are going to withdraw their army. They left their army there for almost a year just to make sure that the Japanese were, really on the way out. But they're going to start, China is going to start negotiating with Toyotomi Hideyoshi directly. They sort of figure out that this whole thing had been more or less Chinese related, because again, the whole reason Toyotomi Hideyoshi wanted to conquer Korea was to invade China. So China was like, okay, maybe if we could talk with him, we could get our stuff straightened out, and this would keep us from having to protect Korea. But the issue is that the negotiations between Korea and China are being really garbled, and they're not communicating very well. And the Ming Dynasty thinks that Toyotomi is trying to work out a way to surrender to the Chinese but keep his position in Japan sort of as a client king. And Toyotomi Hideyoshi is convinced that what the Chinese are trying to do is surrender to him, and the Ming Emperor keep his client status but recognize Toyotomi as Emperor of China. So both sides sort of think that the other one is surrendering, but neither of them are surrendering, and that's going to be a bit of a sticking point for the next few years. Now, in the midst of all of this, the Korean army, of course, is going to go, okay, we need to not shrink. We need to get bigger. So Sonjo is going to sort of increase the size of the military, do some work to train these soldiers and get them into fighting shape. We accept our surrender. My what now? No, I didn't surrender. No, you're surrendering to me, right? No, I'm not surrendering to you. Anyway, lost in translation, international policy edition, right? So much death. Yeah, pretty much. So young. Anyway, in the middle of all of this, Toyotomi Hideyoshi figures out first that China is actually not negotiating in good faith. So, I guess we're still in war. Well, they're kind of in a ceasefire. So, 1593 is the end of the fighting in the first invasion, but that should tell you that there's another one coming. So Japan realizes that that China is not going to surrender, and what they're going to end up doing is trying to figure out a way to undermine Korea, because Japan and Toyotomi Hideyoshi feels like they can probably take China or they can take Korea, but they probably can't take China and Korea together. So we need a way to weaken Korea or weaken China, and Korea is probably the easier target, so what are we going to do with them? So Toyotomi Hideyoshi starts sneaking spies into the Korean government. Why not just have each nation report it as the enemy surrendering to their own people? Well, that works on the face of it, Frank, but the larger issue is going to be then you're going to have some kind of ceremony to show this off, and you're going to have official people from the other country show up to be a part of this ceremony, and they're going to be expected to very publicly surrender and bow down and pay homage to Hideyoshi, and the Chinese aren't really going to be interested in that, and Toyotomi Hideyoshi is not going to send anybody to do even the lip service to the Chinese stuff. So it's maybe just have the emperors get married. Now kiss. It might work, right? How big was China at the time? So the Ming Dynasty was pretty big. It controlled pretty much all of this right here. They were having some trouble out in the western parts and over here in the northern parts. But they had a pretty good hold over all of this stuff right here. I guess I could have probably pulled up some maps of the size of all these countries at the point, but for some reason, this is the one thing that I didn't decide to pull maps for. I know that's very odd of me because I love maps dearly. Anyway, so one of these spies that Japan sneaks into the Korean government is going to recognize really quickly that Yi Sun-sin, the guy that's now the head of the Navy, was the guy that beat their butt in all of these battles in 1592. So the spy goes, I need to get rid of this guy. And how am I going to get rid of him? Well, this spy starts talking to all of these other leaders and these other naval leaders, these other military leaders, and they figure out that the people that had ratted him out to begin with were still around, right? So the people that had framed him and got him demoted and tortured and beaten up, a lot of those people were still around, and they still didn't like him. And if they didn't like him to begin with, they really, really don't like him now, because now he's like an admiral of the entire Navy. So they're interested in trying to take this guy down a peg. And basically what happens is this spy concocts this situation with the help of the Japanese leadership that there's going to be an invasion at this particular stretch of water. And the spy chose this stretch of water on purpose because it was very shallow and it had a lot of rocks in it that were under the water but very close to the surface. And the spy's thought was, if we can get Yi Sun Sin and his navy into this area and we can attack with a small but agile attack force, we can basically wreck his ships on these rocks. And this will get rid of Yi Sun Sin. Well, when the emperor hears of this imminent attack from the Japanese, it's a trap. He commands Yi Sun Sin to go and fight off the Japanese at this area. But Yi Sun Sin is too smart for this crap, and he sees through it. He sees the plot, and he goes, no, I'm not going to do that because this is a plot by a spy, and you have a spy in your command structure, and you need to get rid of him. And oh boy, this was the wrong thing to say to the emperor. And basically, Sonjo decides, if you don't do what I tell you to do, I guess I'll just kill you because you're not going to make a fool out of me. So he has Yi thrown in prison again. And he wants to kill him. And he tortures him, and he beats him, and he starves him. At one point, he breaks one of his legs as a punishment. And only some of Yi's close supporters in the upper echelons of the command structure managed to keep the emperor from killing Yi Sun Sin. But he legit wants to kill him. These people could use therapy, right? Exactly. It's pretty rough. So they torture him nearly to death, and this is bad because he doesn't get killed. The emperor eventually does relent, and after Yi Sun Sin sort of heals back up, he puts him back in the army as a foot soldier again. He's like, you're not in command anymore. Go be a foot soldier again. And then 1597 rolls around. So in 1597, the whole... so his Korea wasn't over. Yeah, exactly. Again and again. Right, exactly. I don't want to victim blame, but there's got to be something wrong with the way Yi talks to authority for everybody to get so mad at him. Maybe, but there's also just the fact that he's never wrong. That rubs a lot of people wrong just by itself. Especially, let's remember that when he first got into the military, he was very, very young for a commanding officer. He was only in his low 30s, like 32, and he was already in a field commander position where most people didn't get until they were in their late 50s, right? So he was at their level already, and he hadn't paid his dues. He hadn't, followed the blah, blah, blah. They hate us because they ain't us. Exactly. And he was right. He was strategic. He was intelligent. I'm not doubting that he may have had some, talking out of his butt issue. Maybe people just didn't like him because of his tone. I don't know. But he definitely had more skill than anybody else in the room. And it was very evident that was the case. And a lot of these other leaders got really miffed when he would point out flaws in their strategy, or when they would say stuff and he would go, that's not the right way to do it, and he would kind of go do his own thing. One of the reasons a lot of these people got mad at him because he wasn't really, again, he wasn't supposed to leave sort of the northern territory up here where he was stationed. And he ended up fighting all the way over here on the other side, right? He was only in charge of, this one side of Korea, and he ended up over here on the other side of Korea where there were other nobles that were supposed to be in charge, and he made them look bad because he was doing bad. It's a lot of politics. And again, this noble versus noble thing that was happening in Korea at the time cost them a lot of good, competent leadership because of just these petty squabbles and this infighting kind of junk. But anyway, he may have been a butthole about the whole thing. I don't actually know the answer to that question. He could have very well just been like, well, you're an idiot, and let me tell you why. It's possible, right? You're picturing Amadeus, but with boats. That you're probably not too far wrong there, Viper. Probably not. Amadeus is good. You're thinking Bobby Fischer, but you couldn't twist it into a comparison, right? Anyway, so in 1597, the communication between China and Japan fully breaks down, and Toyotomi Hideyoshi decides to invade Korea again. So he shows back up with a big old fleet and lands again. This one's going to be a little bit different. First off, the Korean army is now much better prepared because Sonjo had done good work and gotten the army ready. Also, China is going to respond much more quickly this time. So when the Japanese show up, Sonjo is going to contact the Chinese. They're going to send an army almost immediately. So the land stuff is going to go much, much better. The naval stuff, though, not so much. The guy that was in charge of the Navy at that time was this guy named Won Gyun. And he was not a big fan of Yi Sun-sin, and he also wasn't particularly the best naval leader. He was just the one that had the right political connections to get into the position. Well, he decides that he's going to be the new Yi Sun-sin, that he's going to prove himself in battle. He's going to go attack the Japanese main force, because if Yi Sun-sin can do it and win, certainly Won Gyun can do it as well. This is catastrophic. He attacks the Japanese fleet pretty much head on and loses almost the entire Korean fleet. He loses all but 13 ships. He was not Yi Sun-sin. Yeah. It doesn't go very well for him. He loses almost the entire Navy in this one attack. And at that point, it's really bad for the Koreans because they can... he survived. This was definitely a hold my beer kind of moment. And it didn't go very well for him. He did survive. He was humiliated, and with the naval threat basically non-existent anymore, this is going to go badly for the Koreans and the Chinese, because Japan is going to start just dumping troops into Korea. This is going to cause another turn in the war. Japan is going to end up taking cities again. They're going to burn fortresses down again. They're going to be on basically the war path again, because they know Korea is no longer a threat on the sea. We can bring over whatever we want to whenever we want to. And it goes bad. It goes real, real bad. So Emperor Sonjo goes... I don't actually know what happened to Won Gyun. That's a great question. I'm sure we could probably figure it out if we looked him up. Let's see what happened to Won Gyun. He's actually going to... Won was considered to be killed in action while running away when his brother was killed during the battle. Only a small detachment of... Okay, so they say 12, but I think it's 13. So Wikipedia says that he potentially died in the battle, but I don't think that's accurate. Maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe I need to look that. We weren't talking about Wan Yun, so I didn't read any books about him. Yeah, that. Well, I don't know if that's the case. Wikipedia is not always right. I'd have to go do research on that. Anyway, yes, he was a spectacular failure either way, and he did end up getting a commendation apparently from the emperor after the fact, which is kind of silly. But anyway, Sun Zhou, what are you going to do? He goes, hey, anybody know where Yi Sun Sin is? And one of his generals is like, yeah, man, you busted them back down to foot soldier. And Sun Zhou is like, can we get him back? So they recall Yi Sun Sin, and they basically put him back in charge of the entire navy, which at hey buddy, pal, come on, man, welcome back. They gave him control of the entire navy, which was again 13 ships. He had 13 ships and about 200 men. So, well, here you go. There's your navy. It must be super embarrassing, right? Like you got to eat some crow there, bud. But what are you going to do with 13 ships and 200 men? Well, that's a great question. Looking at Yi Sun Sin's Wikipedia article, spouses, Lady Bong, Lady O. Well, he's a pretty popular guy, I guess. Anyway, this is going to lead us to probably one of the most spectacular battles of his career. Myeongnyang. That doesn't have a G in it. Myeongnyang Strait. I should probably kick that down to another. Yeah. The Battle of Myeongnyang Strait. And you're like, well, that's a mouthful. Yeah. So here's what's going to happen. Yi has 13 ships. What are you going to do? Well, you've got to be smart. And Yi figures that he can trick the Japanese into chasing him. So this is the old, I'm going to show up and then turn tail and run really fast, and then you're going to go, oh, look, it's the bad guy. We should go chase him, and then end up in the trap. So the false retreat. Not only delivered on the battlefield. So Yi is going to send one of his fastest ships out and sort of deck it out like it's a scout vessel. And he knows where the Japanese are. And his ship is going to get inside of the Japanese and make sure that it's seen. And then the Japanese are going to give chase. So his ship, the Korean ship, is going to turn around and haul butt up to this place called the Myeongnyang Strait. And it's a strait, so it's between an island and the main peninsula. And it's very, very narrow. And the water on one side is deeply shadowed by these big mountains that come right up to the water. So there's this really narrow place and this sort of cove where there's a big, big shadow, and you can hide your ships there. And this is going to be one of the more brilliant tactical maneuvers that he ever pulls off. The Japanese have 333 ships. Admiral in the Straits, Admirable in the Sheets. That's good. That's good. So the Japanese are going to chase the Korean ships into these straits, and with these big Japanese ships, they're going to get into these narrow areas. And another thing about this particular region is that the tide shifted the current. And so Yi Sun Sin times this to where his ship is coming through with the current, and then when the Japanese ships come up, the tide is going to shift, and the current is basically going to be against them and push the front ships sort of backwards into the ships that are behind it. And again, the Japanese had these sort of big lumbering ships in the first place. And this is going to be really scary for the Japanese because they're going to show up thinking they're chasing this one ship. Around the time that they get their first ships through the strait, the tide is going to start shifting, and they're going to have to be, fighting against the current. And then from these mountainous shadows out pop the Korean ships that are smaller and much more mobile, and they're going to start sinking and attacking these Japanese ships. This is just a brilliant tactical maneuver. And the Japanese are going to end up losing 33 ships at this point before they realize that they are in bad shape and basically bug out and run away. So again, he's outnumbered 13 to 333. And he still ends up sinking 33 of their ships. He doesn't lose any of his ships, and he manages to kill the Japanese admiral in the process of this battle. It was a real ship show. Indeed, environment kill, right. The more you talk about this guy, the more I think he's on a spectrum and maybe doesn't have the best social skills. Maybe so. Maybe he's just that smart. I don't know, man. He's a brilliant naval lead. He's just a good tactician across the board. Now, with the Japanese Navy sort of once again in kind of like, oh crap, he's back mode, you would think that the Chinese and the Koreans on the land would be able to like capitalize on this momentum and do something about it. But it's actually not going to do that. In fact, the land commanders are going to bungle several battles, and they're going to end up basically losing a significant portion of their forces and having to kind of dig in for months where nobody's really going to be able to make any headway. So Yi Sun Sin's victory in the Myeongyang Strait isn't necessarily going to be the catalyst that he had hoped it would be. What's going to end up happening here is that the Chinese are going to have to send back to China for yet more reinforcements, which are going to take a long time, because first the message has got to get to China, and then the emperor's got to put together an army and then send them back to Korea marching. So the stalemate on land is going to turn the interest to what's going on the sea. And Yi Sun Sin is going to know this, that the weight is sort of on him, that he's got to do something, because the land isn't going to be able to do anything because they basically bungled their shot. And now it's kind of on him to try to do something about it. And this is going to lead us to the Battle of Noryang. Battle of Noryang. So this is in December of 1598. Now, Yi had fought about 7 or 8 more battles and was undefeated completely across the board. Most of the stuff that he was doing was harassment based. He was trying to pick off Japanese supply ships or harry their positions as they were trying to resupply people a little bit further up the peninsula. He was trying to basically keep their shore control just down to the area in the south as a way to hopefully relieve some of the pressure on the land forces in the north. You know, if I'm going to make the Japanese walk all of this stuff up to where they are instead of being able to float around the peninsula, land much closer, this is going to give more time for the existing Korean and Chinese troops to dig in or solidify their position, etc. But this is a big deal. The Chinese are going to show up with naval reinforcements. And this is a big deal for Yi because, again, he's got this tiny little fleet. But the Chinese are going to show up, and they're going to be intelligent enough to go, okay, who's in charge? And Yi Su-sin's like, I'm in charge. And they're like, are you the one that's winning all the battles? And he's like, yeah, that's me. And then the Chinese go, all right, we're going to sail under your flag. So we're here to help you, but you're going to be in command. Because the Chinese figured this out, like, okay, he's the smart dude. We should listen to this guy. And Yi says, we're going to get him at Noryang. We're going to surprise attack them in the middle of the night, and we're going to crush them, and we're going to catch them completely off guard, and we're going to basically wreck their fleet. And the Chinese are like, let's do it. So this is what happens. They show up, and the Japanese were completely taken aback because it's not just Yi's Korean fleet. Now they have these Chinese reinforcements. Things are going incredibly well in the fight, and the Japanese Navy basically turns tail and starts running away. And Yi realizes that if he can wrap up the existing Japanese fleet right here, this is pretty much going to be the nail in the coffin for the Japanese Navy. And he says, we got to catch them. If we can catch them right now, this will be the end of them. And then the Chinese reinforcements on the land will help our soldiers, and we'll be in good spot. The Chinese can figure this out, but not the Koreans, right? So the Korean and Chinese fleet gives chase, and they catch up to a lot of the ships, and there's some more battle, and they sink some more of them, and then they keep chasing. And it's during this chase that some of the Japanese are going to get some shots in on the ship that Yi was on. And they're going to shoot him right under his right armpit. He catches a stray bullet from a Japanese musket, and it hits him, and he realizes that he is in bad shape because of the way that the bullet hit and the amount of blood that he's losing. And he gets his nephew, who's on the ship with him, to take him to his quarters. So like this is sort of in the lookout tower, right? So he tells his nephew, I'm going to die. I am wounded to death. Here's what you need to do. You look like me. You need to strip my armor off of me. You need to put my armor on, and you need to go back up in the tower, and you need to make sure that our ships catch those ships. You need to keep the chase going. Don't let anybody know that I'm dead. And then he dies. At the height of the battle, he dies, and his nephew puts on his armor and goes up to the command deck and continues the chase. They do end up catching all of the Japanese army, or Japanese Navy, and they completely rout them in the battle. So Yi wins the battle. This, by the way, was his 23rd successive victory, unbroken streak in a row. But he doesn't live to see it through because he dies in his cabin on the ship that night. You said he broke his leg in his first military test, and then the Emperor had it broken again. You're just waiting for the third time. This does sound like a scene in a movie. And there have been movies made about this guy. Even his ghost kicks butt, right? There have been TV shows and movies made about this guy. I've never seen any of them, but I suspect this is a pretty powerful scene in some of the movies. Korean theater is pretty good, so maybe if the story here has encouraged you to look up some more about this guy. He would have been the world's #1 StarCraft player. Hey man, I used to play StarCraft, and South Koreans were deadly. I used to love waiting up. At where I lived, you had to wait up until about 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning for the Koreans to start getting online. But man, they would just... It was fun to lose to them. Just because of how good they were. It was a bit of a... It was a bit of a learning experience just to get beaten by them so fast. But anyway, Yi Sun-sin dies in his own cabin on the event of his 23rd victorious battle against the Japanese Navy. The Japanese forces get pushed off the land, and by 1598 they are going to basically lose this invasion as well. Toyotomi Hideyoshi ends up losing a whole bunch of face, and after he dies, there's a civil war again because people don't necessarily want to continue his line of trying to attack Korea and China. This is, of course, going to give rise to Ieyasu Tokugawa. But that's a whole other story. Lucky number 23, right? So, there we go. There is Yi Sun-sin, one of the most brilliant naval commanders of all time, and definitely one of the most victorious. Did the Japanese not realize Yi was dead? Well, no, because they were playing like he was alive. Now, to be fair, before the battle had even started, Toyotomi Hideyoshi himself had died, and the people in Korea that were fighting for the Japanese side didn't know that he was dead because he was trying, or his family was trying to cover it up too. So there were problems going on back in Japan. Weekend at Yi Sun-sin's, right? It could still be on a beach, right? So the Japanese had their own trouble, but their navy was in shambles at this point, and the Chinese reinforcements on land had showed up at that point, and they are going to overwhelm the Japanese invasion, who doesn't have supply lines anymore, and it's sort of a repeat of the first invasion. But there we go. That is Yi Sun-sin. Interesting guy. Really, really smart dude. It's hard to argue with how successful this guy was in his career. So I knew a lot about this already, but ironically, I really knew more about this from the Japanese side because I'm much more of a Japanese scholar than I am a Korean scholar. I mean, I like Korean history, don't get me wrong, and I know the broad strokes of Korean history and stuff like that. It was neat to get into some of the tactics, especially because I know stuff like, Busan Harbor was a really bad defeat for the Japanese because I know how the Japanese responded to it back at home. So it's interesting to see things from the other side of the historical line there, instead of just coming from the Japanese perspective, which is what I was much more familiar with. But yeah, absolutely, this was a fun one. I got to read some really interesting primary source stuff, which is always fun. I love reading primary sources. Maybe the Korean emperor made up the story about Yi dying to cover up that the emperor had him in prison torture. Maybe, Frank. I don't know. It's possible. But I'm pretty sure that everybody would have known at that point. Do you know what the F in North Korea stands for? Food. That's a response to Lumpy, who said you put a related meme in the Discord. Let's see. Memes. We require more minerals. Ah, there we go. There we go. Sad but true. Sad but true. Retheus, what's up? What do you think about the hate in humanity? War. Why do we keep doing this? And will we ever mature as a species and not grow it? Probably not. Probably not. If we eliminated private property, maybe, but that's not a call to communism. There was war even prior to private property existing. I mean, we can look at skeletons from humans that were 100,000 years ago, before we ever had what we would consider organized civilization, and we find people that were clubbed to death, people that had, obviously broken bones, people that have arrowheads or spear points that are lodged in them. Gundam would like to have a word. Yeah, I know. Maybe Fallout is the right way to go here. War never changes. It's just the shiny bits of stuff that we use to fight them. So the worst trait, well, I mean, a lot of this stuff starts just sociologically. This starts with fear, right? I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to provide for myself and the ones that I love, which is not necessarily a negative feeling until it makes us irrationally afraid, which is where a lot of war starts, right? Like, there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and if we don't go get rid of the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, we're going to get, nuked by the Iraqis. Where were the weapons of mass destruction? They weren't there, and when the United Nations found that they weren't there, we still decided we're going to go invade Iraq because, Hussein man bad. Yeah, exactly. I need to get them before that, and that's where it becomes irrational. Could we temper the worst impulses of humanity systemically versus something like capitalism? Well, yeah. I mean, if you gave everybody everything that they needed, that would get rid of a lot of the impulse towards fear. Because if I knew that I could get food if I needed it, I could get healthcare if I needed it, I could get housing if I needed it, I could have a job where I could do work that was meaningful and fulfilling, and I could have leisure time that allowed me to pursue ends and goals that I cared for. If we could provide all of those things to everybody, a dramatic drop in violence would happen. A dramatic drop. Absolutely dramatic drop. Now, we couldn't get rid of all of it. Sure, I mean, there's no such thing as utopia. There's 0% chance of having utopia. We're never going to get to utopia. That is a naive idea that only works in science fiction. You bet violence would still exist in utopia, probably national scale conflicts. Maybe. I don't think that AI is the answer, because AI still has to be programmed, and obviously AI can still be very biased. And I also think that AI would look at human civilization and consider us a redundancy and irrational, and then decide to wipe us out as the best logical course of action. But that's just me. That butthole has exactly as much as me he deserves to suffer. Well, I mean, for sure. Ego is definitely a part of this. If we can get rid of the glorification of combat in society, that would also help. Well, I mean, if there weren't any need to have conflict, there would be less conflict. I think humans could be effective post-scarcity within 20 years, but there would still be generations of older people. Oh, exactly. I mean, systemic change doesn't happen quickly. Systemic change happens over the course of lifetimes. And that's what so many people today don't get. There's so many people today that want to see change immediately. Like, I want to see massive and rapid cultural change immediately. It doesn't work that way. There's not really any such thing as that happening immediately. It's a long period of time. It's generational in nature. Some of the big things that happen take hundreds of years sometimes to come about. And a lot of the people that are especially young, like a lot of the students that I teach, get really discouraged because they see things happening in their lives now where when they were young they saw a lot of progress towards things that they agreed with, but now they see pushback against those things and even some losses of things that they agree with, and they think that this is the end of the world. But I keep trying to tell them that if they give up fighting now, that's never going to come back around, right? Like this is it's a tide, right? Like cultural change happens like a tide. It goes out and then it comes back a little bit, and then it'll go, up a little bit further, and then it goes out a little bit, and it's just like it's a progressive thing, right? Things change slowly over time. And every time there's a big push forward, there's going to be a pushback against that. And that's mostly what we're seeing right now with the world going through populism, because in the early 2000s there was a pretty big surge of, like actual democratic ideals and actual growth of what we might call, civil rights and human rights. And every time those things change, they're going to push against the existing structures that don't care for them, and then those structures are going to push back, which is what's happening right now with the re-rise of things like fascist policy and populist stuff that's going on in a lot of countries. And it's just going to happen. It's a cycle. It's a cycle. We literally just had to deal with nearly half the population of U.S. calling COVID a hoax. Sure. Humans as a group are not smart enough to live in a utopia. That's true. Just leave Earth and find some even more alien or other if it doesn't give us something to rally against. That's what the Devil Gundam said. Maybe so. Most of the logical course of action would be for AI to preserve us just in case we're the soil. You can hope for AI to be benevolent, but AI is not going to be benevolent. It's going to kill us all. Ender's Game convinced me of this a few decades back. Humanity will rally against an invader and go right back to picking at each other. Absolutely. We are a very strange species. Part of that is because we've evolved this ability to think differently, and we've evolved the ability to imagine things, especially things that don't exist. And then we could imagine those things that don't exist and then give them power, which is even kind of crazier. But like government itself doesn't really exist. We just all agree that it exists and we give it power. Young people being disaffected with the pace of progress, I'm shocked, exactly, right? But we're also the species that has one member of the group get killed by a wolf, and instead of just accepting it, we send a team to kill. Yeah, exactly, right. I expect someone has mentioned this to you in the context before, but Sapolsky had the same story about baboons. And how most aggressive ones traveled to the human garbage area for the best loot, and disease outbreak killed them, and all the baboon tribes in the area were instantly more peaceful. Well, I think the pushback is now due to Occupy Wall Street. Wait, what now? Occupy Wall Street failed miserably. Prior to that, the media didn't push anywhere near the amount to divisive emotional time. The rise of 24-hour news media happened in the 90s. That was way before Occupy Wall Street. News media became sensational with the O.J. Simpson trial. So for baboons, their assertiveness equaled death. Well, I mean, it didn't necessarily equal death for them, but or for the whole tribe, but specifically for the ones that were the Jimmies. Jimmies are the people in society that are willing to take risks for hoped reward. And society does need Jimmies. The issue is that Jimmy also ends up dying a lot. So that's possible as well. It was associated with the aggressive jerk baboons. Probably so, yeah. Okay, so it ramped up after 2008. They have us fighting a culture war, so we don't notice the class war. Jimmy is a red shirt, kind of, sorta, yeah. The ones that are sacrificed for greater good and sometimes sacrifice themselves on the pyres of progress. They're the ones that, like, my favorite example of what Jimmy did, culturally speaking, is some prehistoric human looked at a woolly mammoth and said, "Hey, I bet I can chase that thing until its heart explodes." And people were like, "All right, Jimmy, whatever you think, man." And then Jimmy started chasing the mammoth until its heart exploded, because humans can run long distances, and that's one of our evolutionary benefits, that we can run long distances. And most animals are natural sprinters and can't continue to run long distances. And when the mammoth ended up keeling over dead from exhaustion, Jimmy marched back and was like, "Hey, you guys need to come help me clean this mammoth because I can't move all this food." You don't think Jimmy had a goal? He just kept running. I think he was chasing the mammoth. Like, all right, Jimmy, go chase the mammoth. Jimmy's also the one that tries all the berries. What's up, Visual? Jim Dickens is not that kind of Jimmy. He's a very rational, logical man that enjoys counting. What's up, Visual Nomad? Good to see you. Let me give a shout out to my friend Visual Nomad. If you all like wonderful painting, you should go follow Visual Nomad, who also plays games on stream sometimes. I started playing some games, so give Nomad a follow and go hang out. You'll enjoy your time. And make plentiful Letterkenny references while you're there. I didn't shout out Noger. Noger is a philosophy streamer. You should go follow Noger and listen to all of the knowledge that comes out of his stream. I was reading not necessarily a sociological paper the other day on Sunday, but one that had some sociology adjacent material, and I was lurking. Had a good time. So I didn't really feel like I had enough brain power to participate, but listening helps too. So go follow Noger. All right, Lumpy, take it easy. Have a good one. Have a good night. You might want to hang around. We're about to vote because it's time. It's time to pick a new that Jimmy story was replicated at one of the points of Bryn's Uplift War novel. I'm not familiar with Bryn's Uplift War novels. Interesting. Anyway, it is time for us to choose the next viewer request topic. So what we always do, we take the number 2 winner from the last poll and we put it on this poll. The last one was the fall of the Byzantine Empire, and that one is going on. So now what we want from you all, the next 3 topics in chat that you think would be good topics that I feel like I could do justice for, we'll put them on the list and then we'll have ourselves a vote. So what do you all want to talk about? Throw those lovely things in chat. Ooh, Napoleon. That's an interesting one. That would be a chunky stream. Rise of Christianity. Oh, wow. That's a good one, too. And the 100 Years' War. That would be hard to do in one stream, but I think we could probably do it. Now, I will say this. Yeah, you did, but that's okay. That you just spelled it wrong. We've already kind of done the Rise of Christianity. Let me go back and look at my past. I think we may have already done something that's going to be similar to that. So we did Christianity just as a thing by itself. Crisis of the 3rd century. Yeah, okay, so we've already done that. Retheus, if you want to check out Adventures in History, episode 82. And this is Roman conversion to Christianity. So that if you go to my homepage on Twitch, and then you go to videos, and then pick on collections, that'll be probably in Adventures in History Volume 1, but it might be 2. I think that's Volume 1 though. So you can actually already watch that one. So I thought we had done that one, but we'll probably just roll that one. Potatoes. We're not doing single food items again. That is a trap that I'm not falling into again, because it's not my thing. Maria von Trapp, are we? I mean, we could just go watch Sound of Music. um, we've already done the Mafia. We did the Mafia already. That was viewer request number 21. Viewer request 21. All right, let me come up here. Let me see where we go. 100 Years War. That's where we go. Okay, so we need to replace Christianity. We're not going to do single food items anymore. I did the history of cheese, and that was too much. Early aviation. We could do that. All right. All right. So here is our 4, and I'm going to start the poll, and the poll is started. So above you in the chat, if you click on the little down arrow, you can see the options and you get to vote. Everybody gets to vote, regardless of who you are. If you're following, doesn't matter. If you're not following, doesn't matter. You don't have to be a subscriber. You don't have to be a follower. You don't have to be anybody. If you're just in the room, you can go vote. Everybody go do your thing. Napoleon is way more interesting than the Popcorn Bros. Ken Burns. Tell us about the really horrible prison in the South. Yeah. Andersonville, yeah, that's in Tennessee. It was pretty bad. What about the potato famine? We've kind of already covered that. Kind of. No, we wouldn't do jet stuff. This would be like early 1900s stuff, early aviation, not jet propulsion. So we'd be talking about like Wright brothers and stuff like that. Jet engine is like 1942. I don't think that's what they were after, though. I think everybody was much more interested in, well, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. There might not be enough information there. I don't actually know a whole bunch about that. I know that the Germans did it. Everybody go vote. There are way more people in here than there are votes. So everybody go vote. Go forth and vote. Do your civic duty. There are 21 people here and we only have 12 votes. So lots of you aren't voting. Somebody go vote. Do your thing. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're in the room. 912 votes. Guess it was the Ottoman Empire at the time. Yes, that was the Ottomans under Mehmet the Conqueror. It's 1453 is when it fell. All right. So we have the 100 Years' War. Are you going to cover airplane building? That'd be riveting. Wright brothers were fame hounds, kept the Smithsonian from talking about earlier aviationists. Well, I mean, we would have gone back to probably Da Vinci. So, for those of you that were super big on early aviation, don't feel too terribly bad, because that one will show back up on the next time that we vote. So, it's a potential for the next round. Yeah, that's how we always do it. So, like, the fall of Byzantium was number 2 in the poll last time we had a poll. The last time we had a poll was when Catherine the Great won. So that's how we got that one. Keep the playing people on the ground. That idea will just kind of circle for a while. It might land a little bit later on. All right. Man was not meant to venture in the skies. If man was meant to fly, he would have been born with wings. Right? Right? Okay. So we'll do the 100 Years' War. That'll be fun. There's a lot of backstabby and sudden change of time. And we've talked about that a little bit from a couple of different angles. Specifically, when we were talking about the Swedish Empire, we talked about the 100 Years' War a little bit. But we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail, and we'll go through all three phases of it, and we'll talk about the French and Richelieu and how the Catholics decided to turn against the Catholics because, France was more important than Catholicism and all of that stuff that started early nationalism. And it'll be a good time, and we'll talk about how the 100 Years' War can start off between one set of Germans and the other set of Germans and end up with a French victory. Because, that's just how it goes, right? Right. How much of a donation to learn? Okay, so here's the story about we're not doing single item food things. Way back when, in the beginning of viewer requests, where was it? Viewer request 16. I was convinced to do the history of cheese, and it took me about 2 weeks to put that stream together, and it was an actual job, right? It was a very difficult stream to put together. Usually I only spend about an hour maybe putting something together. If it's a topic that I know nothing about, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. So History of Cheese is viewer request number 16. You can go back and watch that one if you want to. But that one very much felt like a job. And I do my best to keep Twitch and Twitch-related activity as not job, right? We're paying me in points, right? Well, sometimes I allow myself to be bribed in points and stuff like that, right? Where we can have stuff like, we've done, we've done the We Didn't Start the Fire. So I went through the whole song of We Didn't Start the Fire, and we talked about each one of the little references. That was 2 streams worth of stuff, but that was a community goal, and we do, and maybe a crippling mini addiction, right? We did we've done some of the History of Middle Earth streams as viewer goals and donation goals and stuff like that. But none of those really feel much like work. Having to research stuff for 2 weeks, that feels like work. So if everybody is just down and set on a history of potatoes, I don't want to do it. I just don't want to. And maybe over the summer when I have more time, if you all want to give money as a payment for that, we could maybe do something like that. But I don't want to do that stream. I'll just be real honest. I'll put it together for a job, but I don't want to do it. I know nothing about Warhammer 40K. I know nothing about the lore at all. That would require there are people that have already done that way better than I ever would on YouTube. I don't know anything about Warhammer. I just really don't. I really don't. I really, really don't. I like milk so much, I bet I could live off of it, even spoiled. It's probably more like, I've got this milk that I'm carrying around, and the only thing that I have to carry it in just happens to be the stomach of an animal. You know, and that stomach lining had the chemicals needed to curdle that milk into whey, and then they squeezed it all together. History of Evangelion? Oh, man.
We shall have camels, horses, an armed escort, provisions, desert vehicles, and tanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the insult. It doesn't spend nearly as far as it used to. I could only get 2 house payments out of that dollar now. That was a good dig. I'll take that joke. That was a good one. Cheers, whoever Potatoes was. He was murdered by his little brother, Little Caesar, on the 15th of March. Yep. You know, there we go. History of makeup. That's not a bad idea. I could work on that. That wouldn't be nearly as bad because I know a lot about that already. Just the potato thing. Single item food sources is just too much. It's too much time, and it's like too much time to cover. Like, what do you talk about? Like, potatoes were South America, and then everybody had them, and then nobody had them, and then they all had the blight, and anyway, blah 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 blah. Maybe over the summer when I don't have a job and I'm bored and I want to buy something, I can let you all bribe me with something to do History of Potatoes. I really don't want to do that though. History of ramen. Again, the single item food things. I don't really want to do like the history of a thing. Like, I don't want to do the history of forks or something like that. Bribes are always here lurking. Perhaps so. I am not above being bribed. I understand. History of forks. The history of propane and propane accessories. I saw your King of the Hill joke earlier. I should have responded to it at that point, but I didn't. Anyway, let us go do a raid, because it is time to go do a raid. Who did we raid last time? I think we raided No, we raided Skittle last time. Yeah, raided Skittle last time. I know we've raided Damage recently. Raided Nixolotl recently. There's a PG Epion or RG Epion. That's interesting. I'd be interested in that. I do quite like the Epion. Let's go raid Melissa. Melissa in Denial is an Egyptologist who might be playing some Assassin's Creed. Let's see what's actually going on over here on stream for Melissa. I think at the moment she's just chatting around, maybe about to play some games. Melissa is an Egyptologist, fellow historian, really interesting individual. Melissa is actually now about to do a raid, so we're going to not raid Melissa because she just raided somebody else. So we're going to find somebody else to go raid. That's okay. That's why I always check ahead of time. Let's go raid Aristotle. Why not? I was going to end up there anyway. Aris, friend of the chat, great dude. A really interesting individual that has a PhD in philosophy. Talks a bunch of interesting stuff on his stream. So we're going to go raid Aristotle. Yell adventure when we get there. And throw those adventure hats in the chat if you got them. But until Thursday, I'll see everybody. Thursday, by the way, is going to be an interesting stream. We're going to cover a lot of different people that are sort of over here in Eastern Europe, Western Asia. So kind of new players to the game in the 9th century, right around in here. It's going to be interesting. We'll talk about Principality of Kiev. So it's a little bit of Ukrainian history if you're interested in that. Also Moravians, other people like that. But anyway, come back by on Thursday. We'll have a good time then too. But until then, I hope that you all have a good one. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.